So we are on Daf Samche Amid Aleph, 7 lines from the bottom. Tan Rabban. We brought up one of the Isurim that is mentioned in the Torah is Chayver Chaver. It says, Chayver, Chaver, V'shoel, V'yadayni, V'derish, Al-Amesim. So what is this Chayver Chaver? So it's some kind of summoning spell where you doesn't conjure up from nothing, but it calls different animals and shadim. It's a way of bringing them to you. As you'll see from the Gemara, it's not talking about creating them from nothing. Echad chaver gadol ve'echad chaver katan, whether it's a large being or a small being, even snakes and scorpions. Amar Abaya. Abaya says, Hilkach Haiman did summon zibura vakra. Therefore, someone who summons a bee and a scorpion, he's summoning the two of them because he knows that they're plagued with the bees and the scorpions. So he says, I'll get them all to come to one place, like the Pied Piper, and then they'll eat each other up. They'll beat each other up, and they'll leave the humans alone. Even though that's his intention, it's still asur because it's a kind of kishuf. It's a kind of magic, which is prohibited. Rabbi Yochanan and Maishno, the kfifis. So now the Gemara goes back to what we had discussed before. We had brought a brisa that says that according to the Rabbanan, when someone is mishtachava, when someone bows down to avodah zarah, that's enough. That's considered sufficient, a sufficient maisa that according to the Rabbanan who say you need a maisa, you're going to be chayiv. According to Rabbi Kiva, that's for sure. As Rabbi Kiva holds even less of a maisa than that is chayiv. But according we had the machlekes in the brisa in the Mishnah, increases between the Rabbanan and who was it? Rabbi Akiva about whether Megadef you're going to be chayiv on. The Rabbi Kiva says Megadef is chayiv even though there's no maisa, and Rabbi Yochanan, the Rabbanan say you are chayiv. I'm sorry, the Rabbanan say you're not chayiv. Rabbi Kiva say you would be chayiv on Megadef. And then we brought a brisa that said that the Rabbanan will hold that the Rabbanan who disagree on Rabbi Kiva will hold by mishtachava when someone bows down to avoid the zara, that's a sufficient maisa that he should be chayiv. So for the Gemara, that bowing down is enough of a maisa to be chayiv. When a person moves his lips to say that to be megadef, to be mavarach Hashem, which really means to be mekalel, that's not a maisa. And that they argue on Rabbi Kiva. In that case, and the mission increases. Amarava shani megadef hayel v'yashna b'leiv. There's a difference, which Rashi says. What do I mean hayel v'yashna b'leiv? The bottom Rashi ikachiyav aba'alav. When someone is megadef, when someone blasphemes, when he's mekalel or mavarach Hashem. It depends on what he's thinking. That he's intending to be mavarach, euphemism to be mekalel Hashem. If someone would be mekalel Shem, but his intention is not to do so, that's not mekalel Shem. Like we said before, it's similar to what we said before. If someone bows down to a building and he thinks it's a shul and it's really a church, he's not chayiv for being mishtachava because that wasn't his intention. I mean, that's a little bit. But over here, we're saying even his words are disvalued over here because all the content is what's important when someone is makal shem, when someone is megadif. It's not the action of making the words. So therefore, that kind of saying something is not enough to be mechayiv, according to Rabbanan. So that's the chiluk between mishtachava when someone bows down to avodah zarah that he's going to be chayiv because the action over there is that the action itself is what's making it meaningful, as opposed to speaking, as opposed to being megadef, where it's the content that makes his words meaningful. Therefore, the action of moving his lips is not considered a real enough of a maisa to be mechayiv according to Rabbanan. Masur Rav Zeir on the base. Yotzu Eidim Zaymim She'eben Maisa. If someone says Eidim Zaymim B'Shaygig, by mistake, he said, he made a mistake in the calendar. He thought it was August 1st and it was really August 2nd. And he said, I saw this guy on August 2nd in this place, and it's not true. He was really someplace else. So this giving an example of the top of my head. Or he thought he saw someone killing someone, and it turned out the guy was wearing a mask, whatever the case may be. So he's a shaygig. He's not going to be mechoyev. He's not going to bring a chatas because it's not a maisa. There's no maisa. All he did was say edus. There was no maisa. V'amai halasnu b'leiv. Again, Eidim Zaym L'chaira, the reason why you're chayiv is because of the content of what you're saying, because your testimony. It's not the action of moving your lips. It's because of what you're trying to do. So that's the reason. So L'chaira, since it's less nu believe, I'm sorry, it's the other way around. We're saying this is less nu believe. It's not believe. Rather, it's what he's actually doing. That means that a person, it doesn't make a difference if he's thinking, I don't mean what I'm saying, but he says Eidus and Bezdin. It doesn't make a difference what he had in mind. Lamaisa, he said the words, he said the testimony, and that's what's causing the other person to be chayiv. Amarava Shani Eidim Zaym Hayl Yeshne B'Koil. So he says no, Eidim Zaym is different. Hayl Yeshne B'Koil. So you have to see Rashi again. This is like a Lamdish Gemara, which with Lamdish Chalukim. He says Eidim Zaymim, even though it's less nubalev, and that should be a reason why the Maisa, the words should be a Maisa, but since it's Yeshne B'Koil, like Rashi, Ikar Chiyuvam B'Shmias Koil L'fnei Bezdin Huba. B'Kol Les Be'Mamish Hilkach Havim Gadif to Tali B'Leiv. He says even though it doesn't depend on what he's thinking, but in the end he's judged by the action that he's doing depends on what they hear. They're hearing his voice. It's not the action of his lips, but rather it's they're hearing his testimony. His testimony is what's important. It's not his moving lips that is important. When someone, again, to contrast with bowing down, the actual action is an action of service to the Avodah Zarah. But over here, when he's speaking, if the speaking is missing either that it's believe, that it's be'ikr, depend on what his machshav is, what his intentions are, that's not going to be a Maisa. The Gemara says also, if it's just the product of what he's speaking, but not the Maisa of his speaking, not the action that he's doing with his lips, but the product that comes out, his koil, that's important, which is the case by Edis, then we're not going to say that that's going to be again a lav she'en b'maisa as opposed to hishtachava. Practically Gemara, the koil Rabbi Yochanan lav maisa. Who is that true? That he holds a koil is not a maisa when it's dependent on what comes out. Well, itmar chasma b'koil. If someone yelled at an animal that was harvesting, that was threshing the grain, there's a iser, a lav in the Torah, like sachsum shar b'dishay. Rather than putting a muzzle on the animal, he used his voice to tell the animal it can't eat. Then higa b'koil, or if he led two animals that were klayim, two different sorts of animal, you're not allowed to put them together in a yoke, but he didn't actually physically tie them together, but he made them go together using his voice. Rabbi Yochanan chayiv. Rabbi Yochanan says Yechayiv. Rish Lakish Amar Pater. Rabbi Yochanan Mechayiv, and this is all going in Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan Mechayiv Akimas Piv Havi Ma'is. Rish Lakish Amar Pater Akimas Piv Lo Havi Ma'is. So you see that even though it's just a koil, it's what's coming out of his mouth that's doing the action. It's still considered to be his Ma'isa. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's a Havi Ma'isa. So why would we say that this is all going in Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan Ma'ishon the Chidus Kanlas LaRabbanan. It's all in Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan holds that a koil, that a voice moving his lips together where the action takes place because of his koil. We see over there that is considered a ma'isa. El Amarav. So we have to go back to our original question and we have to answer it differently. Shani Eidim Zaymim Hala Yeshnin Beria. He says Eidim Zaymim is different because it's not. He says there's a different reason why it's not a ma'isa. It's not because it's your testimony that's a separate from your action, but really that what you're saying now is really dependent on what you saw. It's a very schwer word, but this is what Rashi says. Let's see, Beria. Eke chiyuva ba yedei hariya shemeidin sharo Beria less pay maisa. He says when you say Eidus, what you're saying is testimony about what you saw, and what you saw, there's no maisa. It's very hard to understand. The other Rishonim are very, very upset with this because the guy who's Eidim Zaymim, he didn't actually see it. His what he did wrong was lying about, claiming he saw something. So how can you say it's a lav she'em ma'isa that he saw something? He didn't even see anything. So he's mischaracterizing what he saw. So they say different pshatim. They actually have different, even I think even different nuschayos in the Gemara. But that's the way Rashi understands. Tan Rabban, Baal Oiv, right? So we talked about Oiv Yadaini. We said before, Oiv means somebody who talks from underneath. He causes a voice to come out from underneath his arm. So now we're going to say a different price that says a different version of it. That's someone who talks from his joints. Rashi says like from his knees or from his knuckles. And Yudaini is someone who puts a certain bone in his mouth, and that causes voices to come out of from his mouth. That it came out like oiv, which is a sorcerer's voice. Your voice came out. You're talking about the Yidden that they're going to be under oppression, and therefore the voice that they're going to Yidden are going to become like someone whose voice is very, very low because it's underneath the ground. So it's going to be like your voice is coming out like the oiv that comes out from the eretz. My love, the mishtoi kiyorcha. So the Gemara says that oiv just comes out of the ground. So it sounds like it just comes out straight from the ground, not through some joints. So that's what the pasuk means is that the oiv goes out of the ground and it goes into someone's joints, and that's where it where it speaks. Toshma v'tomi shal elikim ro'isi oilam in aretz. I saw a malachim coming out of the ground, and that was talking about. She was talking about that she was hearing voices from these malachim. And they told her things. My love, the mishtoik. Again, it sounds like that the voices came straight out of the ground. Again, it means that it went in between the joints, and that's where it spoke. Bal oiv echad hama'ala b'zichuroi. Bal oiv, another, we've discussed that it comes out from the joints. It also means hama'ala b'zichuroi. It comes out from, a person brings it up to, a man brings it up from his aver. Echad nishal b'gulgoyles, also someone who asks from a skull. He brings the oiv from into the skull. What's the difference between them? When a person is mala the voices of oiv from his aver, in that case it comes up upside down. I guess there's a form to this oiv. It's an actual demon, a human-shaped form. So it comes up with feet first. If he's going lizikuroi. And doesn't come up on Shabbos. Nishal b'gulgoyles, but if it's on Shabbos, oila kedarka, it goes up the normal way, head first. Oila b'Shabbos, it comes up on Shabbos. What does it mean? It comes up. There's no place to go. You're talking about where the skull is on the ground, so it comes up right into the skull. So what does it mean? It's going up. Ella ema oina kedarka va'oina b'Shabbos. You don't say oila, but rather you say oina, that it answers kedarka, meaning that it just means that it answers normally. It just speaks va'oina b'Shabbos, and it means it doesn't have to go anywhere. It just speaks directly from the skull va'oina b'Shabbos, and it even works on Shabbos. And this was the question that Tunis Rupus asked Rabbi Akiva. He said, and what's different today from every other day? It was Shabbos. Yes, so what's today different? So Rabbi Akiva said back to him, who are you, a special person? Who are you? He was the governor of Eretz Yisrael. Amalei the Mari Tzavi, because my master appointed me. So Rabbi Akiva answered back to him, Shabbos Nami the Mari Tzavi. Shabbos we were also commanded by our master, by the Rebbeinu Shalom. Amalei Hachi Kaminach. He said, I know where Shabbos comes from. This is my question. Mi Yemedo in the Shabsa. He asked him, how do you know that today is Shabbos? Amalei Nahar Savchion Yechiach. The Nahar Savchion, the river Savchion, that it's very stormy during the week, and on Shabbos it comes down. Bal Oiv Yechiach. And you'll prove from a Bal Oiv, like we said, that when a person does Mizikuroi, a man does Mizikuroi, it doesn't operate on Shabbos. Kirish Alav Yechiach. And your father's kever will prove it, because your father's kever is Ashon comes out of it, like Rashi says, smoke comes out of it, or the Gemara says, because it doesn't, none of the smoke comes out on Shabbos. His father was in Gehenna, and he was burning up, so there was always smoke coming out of the kever. But on Shabbos, everyone gets a break in Gehenna. Amalei, bizisai bayashtei v'kil lalta. You were mevazami, you were mevayish me, and Mikalati, and you made fun of me. Rashi says that means that's referring to the last thing. I was trying to figure out if there's some way it was referring to the Savyatyan, was I think in Bavel where they came, was in Rome. So he was saying that even where you're in charge, there's still the Rebbeinu Shalom is still in charge, and Bal Oiv is a sorcery that the Yidden don't do and Goyim do. So he's saying even that is subject to Hashem Shabbos. And finally, the last one, he insulted him by saying about his father who's burning in Gehenna. Shoyel Oiv Hainav Derushalam Mason. Frek the Gemara. What does the pasuk say? A din of Shoyel Oiv, which is causing this specter to come up and ask him questions. How's that different from Derushalam Mason? You ask for Mason. So Gemara, Darish Shalom Mesim Kedetanya. When Darish Shalom Mesim means something else. Darish Shalom Mesim zeh hama'arev atzmai, someone who starves himself, and he goes into the Beis HaKfaros. That causes a ruach tuma to rest on him. So it doesn't mean that you're bringing up dead people's voices of dead people, but he brings a ruach tuma on himself by hanging around in the. So he's not actually asking Mesim. So therefore, it's different than Oiv, where you're asking, I guess, some type of specter. Rabbi Akiva would get to this pasuk, he would cry, that a person has the ability by going to the Beis HaKfaros and fasting, that he brings upon himself the ruach tumah. That a person who fasts in order to be able to bring the shechina on him, a ruach tahira, he certainly should be successful. But the Rebbeinu Shalom, it's become impossible because the avoidance of the Klal Yisrael is so great that it makes it that we can't just simply fast and beseech to get the Shechina. It doesn't work. That your avoidance are being mavdil between you and your God and the Rebbeinu Shalom. That because of your avoidance, it's impossible to get it, even though it really should be just as easy as bringing a ruach tumah. Amar Rava, ibot tzaddik baru alma. Once we talked about this pasuk, so we mentioned that this pasuk comes up in another context. Rava says if tzaddikim want, they could create the world. Shenemar ki avanesechem hayu mavdilim, because our beinechem levein elikecha, that the avoidance are what stops us from what he's darshaning is that what the difference that makes us different from the Rebbeinu Shalom's ability to create things is our avoidance. So a person who is not someone who's a tzaddik does have the ability to create, like the Golem of Prague, right? That's what we all think about, and we're going to see that this Gemara talks about a being that's similar to the Golem. Rava Bara Gavra, Brava Taka created a person using his kayach. this kaich of a tzaddik. Shadra l'kamei Rav Zera. He sent this geilam to Rav Zera. Have a kamishtoy bad there. Rav Zera tried to talk to it. Well, have a kamahadale, and it didn't answer. Amle min chavreat. He said, I see you're not a real person. You were created by one of my chaverim, one of the tzaddikim. Hadel afrecha. Go back to dust. He said, I don't need a geilam around me. Rav Chanina Rav Oishi, excuse me if I don't know if it's true that this is a geilam, but it sounds very much like the geilam that I read about when I was a kid. Rav Chanina Rav Oishi have a yasvi kol mali shabsa v'aski b'seif yitzira. They were learning seif yitzira, which is where you get the recipe for creating mivrulahu igla tilsa. They created amongst themselves an igla tilsa. That's a very good calf, either a third of the third one born to its mother, or a third of the way grown. But it's a very tasty calf, and they ate it l'kavod Shabbos. Tan Rabban, ma'inin. Ma'inin is different than what we were talking about. Oiv, Yadaini. We're talking about Darish Mason. Einin is a different thing. So the Gemara is going to talk about what is an Einin. The Pasuk said, Einin is also Asa. Well, Einin of Shimon is Ha'ma'avir Shiva Minei Zachar Alayim. This is someone who places 7 types of zera from a zachar on his eye from different animals, and that causes him to get certain magical powers. It's talking about to someone who does sleight of hand. He fools the eye. Now, I've never heard anyone, I don't know, I don't think people believe that watching sleight of hand is usher. I think it's only someone who legitimately tries to claim that the sleight of hand is really coming from supernatural powers. Rikiva says it's someone who, like an astrologer, or that he knows how to look at the mazalas and figure out things. Today is a good day based on astrology to go out. Tomorrow is a good day to buy things. Planting on Erev Shvius produces good wheat. And uprooting kidneys causes it to grow better. It stops it from going bad. The last one sounds like agricultural advice. I don't know what it has to do with the astrology, but that's the way Rashi teaches it. He says, "Ikri kinyas miyisrois klema oikir kinyas ve'ena kaitzrun shuv ena maslian ve'en markivais." I guess it was based on some astrology. It wasn't based on agronomical principles.
So that's ma'oinen?
That's ma'oinen, yeah. Ma'oinen is using go looking at the horoscope in the newspaper is ma'oinen. You look at, I don't think taking the advice is ma'oinen. I think, I'm not sure if it's referring to the person who gives the advice or the person who takes the advice. It's not clear to me. From the first one, it says it's talking about someone who puts it on his eyes. It sounds like it's the guy who does it, or Oichaz Einayim is also the one who does it. All these sound like the person who does it, not necessarily the person who uses it. Ton Rabban, Menachesh. Another thing that the pasuk mentions is Menachesh. What's a Menachesh? Zeh Amar Pitay Nafla Mipiv. This is all the different superstitions, like passing under a ladder gives you 7 years of a broken mirror, a black cat. So someone who says Pitay Nafla Mipiv, the bread fell from his mouth, it's a bad omen. Makla Nafla Miyadi, his stick friend fell from his hand, it's a bad omen. B'nai Kairaloi Me'acharev, his son called him from behind. Oyrev Kairaloi, a raven called him Tzvi of Sikam Derech, a deer crossed his path. Nachash Miminoi, a snake came on his right side. Vishel Mismaili, a fox on his left side. Al Taschel Be Shachris. Al Taschel Be, if someone tells, Rashi says, it's talking about someone who says the Gabbai Staka, or the Gabbai for taxes, don't start with me. It's a bad, I don't want to be the first one to be started with. It's a bad sign. Shachris who, or someone says to somebody's coming to collect money he owes, he says, I don't want to be the first thing in the morning to pay a debt. It's bad for the day. Rish Chodeshu, he says Rish Chodesh, Motzei Shabbosu. All these are understood to be bad days without any basis. That's Menachesh. Taner Rabbanan.
So the common thing with the black cat, that's also part of Menachesh?
I don't see why not. I don't see why not. I think all these things are Menachesh. I always get into this argument by paddleball. When I play paddleball, people argue about like if the ball fell on the line or over the line, and then they see whoever wins the next point. They say, "Oh, it proves that you were right. That was the one who was right." And it sounds like Menachesh. You can't. I mean, the truth is they don't really believe it. I mean, when you say even when you say black cat is 7 years of bad luck, like. I guess if you'd step out of the way, or you'd see a black cat, and you wouldn't go there. But if you just like say it as a phrase, you don't mean anything by it, you don't believe it. I don't know if that's menachish.
There's also a custom, and I don't know if that's Jewish or not. Before people travel, they would sit down for a minute before a family travels.
I never heard of that.
Never heard of that.
I mean, there are minhagim. There are things that are minhagim that have ancient roots. And they could have reasons. That's certainly we have all kinds of customs that we do, right? We eat an apple dipped in honey on Rosh Hashanah, but it's the Mishnah Berurah very clearly says that you can't believe that eating the apple is what's going to give you a good year. It has to be that it's going to inspire you to tshuva. So there are minhagim that have reasons, but you can't. We don't believe that I mean, there are things that are. Like we listen to the shofar. The shofar, the Torah told us to do it. If Torah tells us to do something, then we do it. But we don't even have to think about the reason for it. The Torah tells us eating chazir is bad for our neshama. We don't have to have a reason for it. It's not menachesh if we say that if you eat treif, it's metamtem esalev. That's what the Gemara tells us. But something without any basis or with a goyish source. Is menachesh. Tanraban. Loise nachashu v'loise einenu koin elu hamenachshem b'chulda ba'oifes u'b'dagan. It's talking about like these people who are menachesh. They try to look at weasels and at birds and fish, and they try to determine the future based on that. Zok the Mishnah. Hamachalal. Continuing on those things that get skila. So someone who's machal Shabbos on something that yechayev karas, if you do it on purpose, but there's no edim, or he did it b'shaygig, he brings a chatas. So machal de can be the chilul Shabbos havi ve'ein chayev and loyal shigasei chatas loyal zayne karas. There are things that are exceptions. What kind of chiv Shabbos doesn't have karas and chatas? Mahi, sagt the Gemara, Tchumim v'alibed Rebbe Kiva. According to Rebbe Kiva, who says Tchumim ma'daraisa, he says although it's daraisa, it's not included in the list of the 39 malachas because there's no chatas and there's no karas, and therefore there's also no skila. And Harvara alibed Rebbe Yossi. Rebbe Yossi said that Havara l'lav yatzis. It tells you that Havara is not like the other malachas that have a chiyuv karas. It's excluded from karas. And therefore, it's also not going to be included, according to our Mishnah, in skila. Zok the Mishnah, Makal Ava v'imay, ene chayv ad sheyikalem b'shem. Someone who's makal, who curses his father and mother, he's not mechuyev until he curses them using the Shem Hashem. Kill him b'kinoi if he used the Shem Hashem, but not the actual Shem of Yud Kei Vav Kei. He did a kinoi like Shindalid or whatever the different elikim, I think would be also a kinoi. Rameh says all you need is to use the Shem is in Hashem's name. It doesn't need the actual Shem Hashem. The Chachamim say no, it needs the actual Shem Hashem. Second, Raman Cham, Rav Menachem bar Yosihu. That's Rabbi Menachem bar Yosi. The Tanya Menachem bar Yosi. Omer b'nikvay Shem Yumas. This is talking about someone who's mevarach Hashem. It's talking about someone who's speaking about Hashem. So it means, and like we said before, it means someone who's mekalel, but he uses the Shem Hashem to be mevarach the Shem Hashem. He says the Rebbeinu Shalom should be mevarach using the Shem Hashem. So that's Yumas. So it says Menakvei Shem Yumas. Ma Tamaloim Shem. What does it have to say benakva shem yumas? So it say benakva yumas. It's coming to tell you that it's not talking of, it's talking about someone who's makal love v'imay, that they're only mechuyev with a kill Hashem. So again, this is the chachamim who say it has to be the Shem Hashem. Turn around. If you learn it out from the pasuk, it has to be just like benakve Shem, like we saw in the earlier Mishnah, when you're noikev, when someone's mavarach Hashem, it also has to be the Shem without a kinoi. So too, when someone which learned out from it, makal lav v'imay also has to be. Turn around. Ish matamud lainu. What is it? Ish. The pasuk is ish. Matam le ish ish. The pasuk says ki ish ish asher yikalas avav es imay mos yumas avav imay kilal damav by. What does it say? Ish ish lo rabbis ba bas tumtum v'androgynous. It's coming to include not just the ish, but also a daughter or a tumtum or androgynous, someone who's in between a boy and a girl. They're all included, even though the Torah said ish. The second lashon of ish includes everyone. Ajikalis avos imay, ainli ella aviv v'imay. That would only, maybe that would tell you that only if someone's makal both of them. Aviv shaloi imay, imay shaloi av. What if he only was makal one? If he's only makal his father, not his mother, or vice versa. I mean, nayin. Tamaleima aviv v'imay kilel damabay. The pasuk repeats itself. It says, Kia ishish ashikalis aviv es imay meishumos, and then it goes further and it says aviv imay kilel. It says twice. So that tells you aviv shalei imay, imay shalei aviv. Aviv imay kilel. Damav boy. That's the end of the pasuk. Aviv kilel, imay kilel. Divrei Rabbi Yoshi. This is Rabbi Yoshi who learns it out. He learns it out from the ish ish, and I'm sorry. He learns out from the fact that it says aviv imay twice. That's coming to tell you that they're both they chayiv even if you do just one of them. We always, if the Torah says aviv imay, it doesn't mean to say that you only chayiv if you do both of them. It means it's listing all the people that you chayiv for being makal. So that's standard interpretation is that it means either one. So Moish Yumas Bekila, Ato Ayim Eskina Ela Ben Achas Mikol Misas. So okay, so that's Rabbi Yoshi's, that's Rabbi Yonason Shita. Vazak the Gemara Vaiter, and the Gemara later on will say what he learns from the pasuk. Moish Yumas Beskila, Ato Ayim Beskila Yana Leba Achas Mikol Misas Hamurs B'Torah. How do we know he gets skila? The pasuk doesn't say which; it just says Yumas. Nemakan Damar Boy, V'Nemalon Demeim Ba Malam Beskila Avkam Beskila. Like we saw earlier when we were talking about the din of skila, we said you learn it out from Gzeir Shabbat from Dmeim Ba. Einish Shamanu Azhar Minayim. So all this was saying what the einish is for someone who's makal aviv imay. Where does the Torah say you're not allowed to do so? He has to have a lav also. Tamalem elikim loisekal. So the whole pasuk over there, it's not really referring to be makal aviv imay. It's talking about elikim loisekal, which means the pashtus. We're going to see some machlokes later on, but pashtus it means it's talking about a dayan. The nasi ba'amcha loisar. The pasuk continues that you also can't be makal a nasi, a king. So we learn out from. So what's the drashim? Haya aviv dayan hareyu b'chlal elikim loisekal. If his father was a dayan, then it's included. Then it would be elihim loisekal, because that's referring to a dayan as well. So if his father's a dayan is included. If haya aviv nasi hareyu b'chlal b'nasi ba'amcha loisar. And how do we know just his father who has neither of those positions? You can learn it out from the two of them. Loi roi nasi karoi dain, loi roi dain karoi nasi. Loi roi dain karoi nasi shari dain ata mitzaval hayrasai. Karoi nasi shiata mitzaval hayrasai. A dain has an advantage that you have to listen to his psak. When a dain makes a decision, everyone has to listen to it. If a nasi makes a psak, now this is yeah, okay, but a nasi is a melech. A melech is not a judge. He's so he's not mitzvah al hayrasai. You don't have to listen to him when he makes a psak. You have to listen to his commandments. But if he tells you, your milchach spoon is fell into the flesh, so you have to throw it out. Tell him you're not a rabbi, you're not a dayan. I don't have to listen. And loyroi nasi karoi dayan, and a nasi has an advantage over has advantage over a dayan. Shanasi atamitzuval hamarasai. If someone rebels against a nasi, he says, "I'm not going to listen to you anymore. I'm going to do what I want." He's mechayemisa. The dayan says, "I want you to show up for a milchama, show up with to join the militia." He could say, "That's not your job. You're a judge." What's the tzara shav of a nasi and a dayan? Shehem ba'amcha, they're part of your nation. V'atam muzar al kalas, and you're mechuyev if you're mekal them. Afani avi avicha shem ba'amcha. V'atam muzar al kalasei. A father is also part of your nation, meaning he's a mitzvah Torah observant Jew, and you also the Torah. So the Torah is telling you're not allowed to be mekalim. So tomorrow, how could you make such a tzara tzava? Marat tzara tzava shabahen shechem gedulas garmelhen. A nasi and a dayan are both chashuv people, so you can't. It makes sense that you're not allowed to be mekal them. How do you know your father, who's just a regular person? But there's also a law that you're not allowed to be makal someone who's a deaf person. So that's talking Rashi says Mumla means the nidafin, the I don't think that wasn't exactly what he said. But Mumlalim b'shvelim, the lowly people. It's not just referring to Gedalim, it's also referring to the salt of the earth. Maybe there's an Isra Mimakala Cherish, because he's very lowly. The Torah has Rahmanas on him, and he says, you're not allowed to Mimakala him, you're not allowed to curse him. Nasi V'dayin Yechichu. So I'll prove from Nasi V'dayin. Mal Nasi V'dayin Shechem Glos and Garmel and Cherish Yechichu. Because our din, Loi Roi Zek Roi Zev, Loi Zek Roi Zet, Shav Shem Shein Amcha, Vatam Muzar Al Kolosan, Afani Evi Avicha Shem Amcha, Vatam Muzar Al Kolosan. So that will be the Tzara Shava. We'll learn out from Nasi and Dayan and a Cherish that that your father and mother also is Hazara on Kalase.
But that should include the whole nation.
So I don't think it. So I think it's going because I think it's limited because the Torah had already given a einish for being Makal of Eve'ima. There's a lav also for being Makal any yid. But it's not a lav that has misa. So now when the Torah said there's a special einish of misa for being makal of v'imay, and now that we have a tzara shava, we limit it. Say tafast and rubalei tafasta. We just say the next thing to say is that this azhara is going on makal of a v'imay. Actually, I think that it's not needed. You don't need an azhara for makal. Stama Yid, because you're not allowed to be Makal Yid. There's a lav on that as well. I mean, not with skila, but there's a lav. How could you learn out from Cherish and Dayan and Nasi? They're all unusual cases. But your parent is a regular person. The Gemara asks, the way we learn it out is because you didn't have to say, it could have said, we don't need both, you don't have to say both a dayan and a nasi. Say either one of them together with a cherish. Elikim lamali, imene in the gufa, tneyu in the aviv. So why does the Taka say Elikim? It could have just said Cherish and a Nasi. And if you'll say a Nasi has a Kayach because people have to listen to him. If you rebel against him, that you're going to be Chayiv Misa, but I'll prove from a Cherish that that's not the reason, because a Cherish is also Isser Klal. So many in the Gufa today in La'aviv. So you give it La'aviv. So Hanicha, this whole limud is Hanicha Lamad Amar Elikim Choil. That when the pasuk says Elikim Loisekalo, it's referring to a dayan. Elamad Amar Kaidish, according to Mandam who says it's referring to being Mekal B'Mavarach Hashem, Ma'ikal Ameimer. The Tanya, there's a machlekes. Elikim Choil, Divir Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says it's referring to a dayan. Rabbi Kiva, I'm Elikim Kaidish, it's referring to the Bain Shalom. The Tanya Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov Aima, Azhar l'mavarach Hashem minayin tam l'ayim loisekal. That he learns it out, according to Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, Rabbi Kiva learns it out from Elikim loisekal. So Lamanda Zaktamar, Lamanda Elikim chayil gam kodesh michayil. According to Manda Amar, the Elikim is chayil, meaning it's referring to a dayan. So we'll still be able to learn out an Azhara from the Kal Hashem, because we'll make Gzeira Shava. There's an Azhara from Chayil, so we also will learn out Kodesh from Chayil. If there's Azhara from Bimakal, a regular person, certainly a dayan, certainly there's a Azhara for being Makal the Rebbeinu Shalom. L'manda Elikim Kodesh, Gamin Chayil mi Kodesh. So the Gemara, Bishlam L'manda Elikim Chayil, Gam Kodesh mi Chayil, L'manda Elikim Kodesh, Gam Chayil mi Kodesh. The fact that there's an Issa to be Makal Hashem, to be Mevarach Hashem, certainly doesn't mean that there's an Issa to be Makal dayan. You can't make a Kal V'chaimer. You can't learn out one from the other. Hashem is obviously very different. It's much more serious. Dilma Kodesh Izer Achol Lo Yizer. How do you know? So Gemara, in Kain Lichtav Kro Lo Sekel. You could have said like cake sekel. You shouldn't make a klala. Mais loisekalo. It adds on loisekalo shmami no tarti. That tells you both additionally, not just the Rebbeinu Shalom, but also chayil, also a dayan. Okay, we'll stop by this Mishnah. Bez Shem. We'll learn tomorrow. If the Olam is in the mood, I wouldn't mind learning. Try to learn an Amid tonight. If you feel like Sunday is going to work for you, Sunday night's going to work. How does that sound?